you're right. They're generating income and they're investing in something and selling something and they're generating income. However, it's not profitable. That's different. Generating income and expenses is different than being profitable. You can only be profitable if you can deduct your expenses off top.
I really wish that our politicians and our legislators did more looking out for the little guy. But it's hard because you got a guy waving $10 million, $20 million, like, let's do it this way. And you're like, well, all right, we'll do it that way. And so that becomes a challenge. There wasn't a lot of knowledge amongst politicians and everything about how the cannabis industry was working and how the cannabis industry works. When you go to set up these regulations, you're hearing from guys who have more money than sense a lot of times, and they want it their way because that gives them an advantage, but it also creates a giant barrier to entry for smaller businesses, smaller entrepreneurs who've been squeezed out.
I was struck by the fact that Black politicians were coming into South Central LA and telling us this is the last time, Black people, that you will have the opportunity to partake in the industry. You didn't have the opportunity in tobacco and cotton, you name it. We are not a part of it. We are the workers and not the owners.
Let's go.
And so I took that charge and responsibility, and I'm so pleased to see him standing behind us in solidarity. But I'm here to tell y'all, I'm first representing the Black mamas.
Go.
My name is Kika Keith. I am a mother of 3 daughters. And this is about legacy and generational wealth, and not just about the wealth of me and my children, but the wealth of my community.
Drug policy starts as a war on people. From the very beginning, Asians, African Americans, Mexicans, Mexican Americans. And moving forward, what you saw was the building of a foundation of racism, a foundation of systematic targeting. It became commonplace where people like me, that looked like me, people of color, could be easily profiled, questioned, detained, arrested, incarcerated, prosecuted, and sent to prison for a long time.
The numbers of how many Black and brown men had been arrested on marijuana charges, it was stunning. Every study shows that marijuana use before legalization was pretty equal in every age group, every gender, every race, and yet all the arrests were Black and brown men. We knew that it was really our moral obligation to correct for that as we were legalizing and creating this new economic opportunity. And so we were determined to craft an equity policy that was intentional about making up for the harm that government had done to Black and brown communities.
But yet we are less than 5% of representation as far as business in this space. So like I said, I think social equity was a good idea. It just hasn't really been executed. I think a lot of these bigger companies want to, say it and talk about it, but actually doing it is few and far between. Let's get these Black and brown people involved, but then no education comes with it and no real, like I said, resources to help them learn the space come with it. This is our green rush. We missed prohibition, we missed the gold rush, and I really feel like, we as our people, we need to have a footprint in this space because, like I said, we were directly affected by the war on drugs the most.
And the inequity is why we're here today. 80% of all licenses that have been issued over the last 3 years have been to white males. And we should all be concerned about that.
You can be classified as low income if you're an unemployed millennial and living in Newport Beach with your wealthy parents. If you're a recent refugee from Ukraine, you can get on a special fast track for a weed license in California. There's no state requirement to have a combination of history, low income status, and family relationship to the neighborhoods that were over-policed because of marijuana.
I've gone to a couple conventions and you would look around and not even believe that you were at a cannabis convention. These people, you would think that you were at the PGA golf tournament or something. I mean, way. I was like, wow, these are the same people who probably 5 years ago would have been like, arrest him. He was smoking a joint.
When we started this journey of reforming the cannabis legislation to allow for social equity, communities of color to benefit from the cannabis industry, my first meeting was with the farmer, who demanded that all 14 retail licenses in the city of Fresno be awarded to him, because only he had the means and only he had the lawyers with ties and the scientists on contract to make cannabis safe in our city. This is somebody who's never grown cannabis in their life. We had requests from individuals who controlled the distribution of alcohol in the whole valley, requests that only they be entrusted with the distribution of cannabis. We had dairy farmers who'd never grown a marijuana plant in their life, request that all the licenses go to them because only they could be entrusted to grow, produce, and distribute marijuana. And this wasn't because they were better equipped or they had experience in the industry. It was simple greed. We have seen simple greed from corporate America, corporate interest, and in Fresno, corporate farming interest attempt to hijack cannabis from communities of color for their sole benefit.
They did not legalize marijuana to create a new drug war in California. California legalized marijuana to end mass incarceration and racial injustice against Black and brown people. Unfortunately, the state is now planning to spend $126 million for a new drug war, but only $15 million to help drug war victims create legal businesses in the new industry and reinvest in their own communities.
Where does the funding that is coming from the existing revenue, right? So we've already given out licenses, we already have operational businesses, and where does that funding go in terms of tax revenue? And is it going to the right places? Are we really investing in racial equity work? One of the challenges in California to doing that is that we're not allowed to legally consider race. And I would contend that race is a factor because racism is a factor, right? And so if you criminalize things and they had a racial disparity to them, it then puts you at a disadvantage to not be able to consider that. And so Prop 209, which was passed, almost 30 years ago now, is the reason why we can't explicitly say we need to do right by the following people. So we had to find other ways to approximate race, even though the original pattern was race. And so it's a loose approximation, right? We're trying to talk about who was directly harmed. But what does harm mean? Does that mean I lived in a community where people, were over-criminalized? Is that am I harmed? Does that mean that I had a family member? Does that mean that I personally was arrested or incarcerated or have a misdemeanor or a felony conviction? So all of those things are the ways that we're trying to kind of approximate a process that we know is racialized.
By the same token, I then looked at the equity waivers given. The list I have has 322, and I know there was an original number and then there were more waivers granted, and I look at 122 in Humboldt and 62 in Mendocino and 19 in Los Angeles. So I want to understand.
You mentioned one of the challenges being sort of the broad application of the geographic locations. And data from the state librarian shows that this definition encompasses about 80% of the people in the state who could theoretically qualify for the fee waiver program. So for you, what does cannabis equity look like for the state of California in the future?
What does adequate cannabis equity look like? I think it looks like a diverse market, like owners who have been identified either by the state or by local jurisdictions as having been negatively and disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, realizing actual ownership in those businesses and generating generational wealth. I think it also means a diverse workforce. Those two things I think are really important and reflected in a number of local equity programs and something that the state has started to expand beyond just those local programs, in part through that fee waiver program. So really a diverse market.
The meaning of equity is not always well defined. In 2019, California only had 4 cities, splitting up $30 million. Oakland, San Francisco, Sacramento, Los Angeles. In 2023, we now have 28 cities fighting for $15 million. During the same time period, the cannabis law enforcement budget started at $60 million, but magically grew to $130 million. The industry kept growing, $1.4 billion to now $5.3 billion. So where's the reinvestment?
In the city of Los Angeles, you had to have a property in order to apply for a retail license, for a manufacturing license, for a cultivation license. I've come to realize that this is a real estate game first and foremost, almost like the McDonald's of the world, right? It's about the real estate. And if you don't have the real estate, you can't play. And even in Oakland, where they made it where you did not have to have real estate in order to get a license, you still had to get the property afterwards, so you can't open your business. You will find that your property, where it might have been $1 a square foot if you were renting it for a barbershop or a store, is now $8 a square foot for cannabis. Where are you getting this money? I had to pay $60,000 in order to hold my property. My property was $12,000 a month. For a 2,000 square foot property, do the math on that of how much that price was inflated per square foot. In my community of South Central LA, I was not in Beverly Hills at those prices. These become barriers to entry.
Even the most well-run, tightly oiled business in a market that's legal, like let's say retail, even their profit margin is like 6%, right? And that's a business that can deduct all its expenses. Cannabis companies can't deduct expenses, only the cost of goods sold, because it's illegal federally. Section 280E of the IRS code says that even illegal businesses have to pay taxes. But at the same time, they don't have the benefit of deducting expenses, which means that they're paying mostly everything they have to taxes. And on the alternative, with our state structure, the state of California charges exorbitant excise tax on the cannabis, as well as a cultivation tax. And a cannabis business that's operating legally and paying its taxes is going to come out short 100%. Because 40 to 60% federal taxes, 30 to 40% state taxes. Cities want anywhere, Oakland is very generous. They're only asking for less than 1% for some equity business, but generally cities want at least 5 to 10% of taxes. You're looking at anywhere between 70 to 90 to 110% in taxes. You're right, they're generating income and they're investing in something and selling something and they're generating income. However, it's not profitable. That's different. Generating income and expenses is different than being profitable. You can only be profitable if you can deduct your expenses off top.
Opening cost to open a retail shop in Fresno is $1.5 million. Nobody's walking around with $1.5 million, a chump change in their pocket, especially if they spent time incarcerated based on the war on drugs. Our challenge has been, how do we ensure that we protect the same communities of color that we're trying to benefit from becoming window decorations or, false fronts for corporate America?
Governor Newsom's cannabis tax reform bill contains nothing to support our equity businesses. We are critically underfunded businesses with razor-thin margins being eaten up by aggressive compliance requirements, heavy fees, security concerns brought on by a lack of access to banking. We have punitively high taxes that make it impossible for small businesses like mine to compete with both well-funded, vertically integrated multi-state operators and the unregulated market.
First thing I would suggest in terms of being able to correct some of the wrongs that are and some of the patterns that we're seeing now that Prop 64 has been passed is I would halt giving out any more licenses, right? I would stop right now today and say we're not going to give any more out until we get an equity program in place and until we make sure that we've offered an opportunity and funding for the people who were harmed by the war on drugs to be able to be participants in this market. In terms of policy, being able to really consider how we invest the revenue and stopping the existing distribution of licenses until we can get an equity program is a first start. I think moving forward, though, one of the things we need to do when we're doing racial equity work is really consider how do we not just stop the bad processes that we had in place or get rid of laws that are discriminatory, but also building into the, rolling back those laws is how do we do right by the communities that were harmed by those laws now that we've realized that those laws were not helpful.
In order to guide efforts that repair the harm created by decades of racialized marijuana policy enforcement, the California Urban Partnership and Institute for More recommends that the state legislature and governor adopt a Cannabis Equity Definition, CED, in 2024. We strongly recommend that this definition start with a recognition of the very basic elements associated with populations of children, youth, families, communities, and individuals who faced disproportionate trauma and generational economic harm. These elements include marijuana-related arrests and incarceration, being a low-income member of a household in a drug war-impacted area and time period, and being an immediate family member of an impacted person. We recommend that the CED and eligibility for equity benefits be amended over time, based on ongoing research and stakeholder engagement. In addition to providing drug war survivors with consistent access to capital, tax relief, technical assistance, priority processing, licenses, and other remedies to support their unlimited and generational wealth building in the cannabis industry, as well as family and community stabilizing supports, we recommend that the state of California issue a formal apology and commitment to drug war survivors and their descendants.
Don't fellas